Barclays' response to the ongoing banking crisis that they've created is extraordinarily arrogant. Um, Here's an institution that prides itself on stability, reliability, and above all, trust. And yet, in an almost comically tragic failure, the bank's IT glitch has left thousands of customers unable to access their accounts, conduct transactions, or indeed buy necessities for their children. And a payday outage of this scale is a nightmare scenario, particularly when it coincides with the UK's self-assessment tax deadline. And while I wasn't directly impacted by the tax deadline, I was directly impacted by sort of problems of trying to access stuff through my debit card. And what I found so extraordinary was the absence of people at the end of a telephone. So Barclays staff seem only to work Monday to Friday, even in the middle of a crisis which they've created. On January the 31st, the IT failure disrupted Barclays' online and mobile banking services, and this has led to customers finding their balances frozen, payments lost in cyberspace, and entire accounts seemingly vanishing into the digital ether. And reports have flooded in across social media, with some unable to pay their weekly groceries, settle urgent bills, or even purchase baby formula. And for many, the failure represented not just an inconvenience, but a direct challenge to their ability to feed their families or keep their homes warm. And according to adding to this distress, Barclays' initial communications were painfully vague. The usual platitudes of "we're aware of the issue and we're working hard, we're trying hard to fix this" appeared across their customer service channels, but the real blow came from their official social media account. And when a desperate customer reached out for help, Barclays had the gall to suggest that they turn to families or friends for support, or even to a food bank. The Barclays response offers an excellent example of what not to do in a crisis. Let's consider a few key failures. The failure to offer immediate solutions, and despite claiming that customers could still use ATMs, many reported incorrect balances and blocked transactions, and the bank insisted it would ensure no one was left out of pocket, but the damage has already been done. The lack of empathy in telling customers to seek charity for an issue entirely of Barclays' making is not merely incompetent, it is actively insulting. This is not just a bad look, it's a fundamental breakdown of a relationship between a financial institution and its clients. The poor crisis communications is very similar to the poor crisis communications of NatWest and Coutts when Farage had his crisis. While issuing apologies is necessary, they mean little when paired with continued failure. Barclays' repeated assurances that issues would be fixed soon doesn't match the reality. This lack of transparency only fuels further frustration. And the timing of the crash, coinciding with the end of the month payroll cycle and HMRC's tax return deadline, could not have been worse. This meant that many individuals, particularly those self-employed, faced significant financial and reputational risk. And the suggestion that HMRC was working with Barclays provides very little reassurance when tax penalties loom large. The debacle is more than an embarrassing blunder. It speaks to larger systematic and systemic issues within British banking and British society. The over-reliance on digital banking, as more branches close and cash access diminishes, banks push customers online and specifically push them into their app. Yet when these systems fail, there is no recourse, no human fallback, nobody answering the telephone. The fragility of IT systems in finance is exposed. Barclays is hardly alone in suffering from catastrophic technical failures. TSB, RBS, HSBC, NatWest have all had high-profile collapses in the recent past, suggesting that the sector remains woefully unprepared for large-scale tech disruptions, let's say by accident. But what if there was a large-scale tech attack by intent, not accident? Our banking would be in chaos. Our country would be at the mercy of any enemy that was clever enough to attack our banking sector, we would be stranded. And this issue about accountability, who precisely will be held responsible for this failure? The bank has promised compensation, but how does one qualify for compensation? How does one explain the stress of a parent unable to buy formula for their child, or the humiliation of having a full shopping trolley rejected at the checkout? How does one explain that? If Barclays wants to restore trust, it needs to go beyond boilerplate apologies and vague reassurances. It must offer automatic compensation to affected customers rather than forcing them to fight for redress. It must invest in infrastructure to prevent future failures, demonstrating a commitment to reliability. It must overhaul crisis communication strategies to ensure that customers feel heard, respected, and most crucially helped. And by the way, who do you complain to? How do you complain when the telephones aren't being answered? The only way that I could think of complaining was to write, literally to write. And I got my letter off, by the way. I think this is a detestable, an abhorrent, and an arrogant system when there is nobody around to monitor the system, to deal with customers, when there is nobody that you can see. At a time when branches are shutting, when banks are shutting their branches and reducing human customer service, incidents like these prove that financial institutions can't afford to lose public goodwill. It's not enough for Barclays to promise that no one will be left out of pocket. That's not enough. I have wasted time today chasing after Barclays, and I don't intend to take that lightly, and I hope nobody would. Time is valuable, and Barclays need to ensure that their customers are never put in this position again. In the meantime, if you're a Barclays customer and you're locked out of your money, well, perhaps you can write to them actually, maybe you can write them a check, assuming, of course, systems are capable of processing it. Maybe they need your charity. Maybe Barclays should declare itself as a charitable institution, a vulnerable institution in need of help. Poor little Barclays. Poor little Barclays. I must say I don't have a lot of pity for them.